Being no more questions for the bill sponsor and the panel, this concludes our bill hearing on 1352. Delegate Wilson will present next HB 1336. And let's see, I have Karan, Watkins, Michael Adams, Matt Tifo. I don't know. Yeah, Matt Tifo as well.
Yeah, good afternoon, colleagues. Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, Delegate C.T. Wilson here presenting House Bill 1352, the Procurement and Construction Contracts Payments Reform. Basically, House Bill 1352 improves cash flow, fairness, transparency, and accountability in Maryland's public procurement and construction markets. The bill is not punitive. Establishes consistent expectations, timely payment standards for work that is performed. Why this bill matters, because contractors and subcontractors operate on thin margins and often front substantial labor and material cost. Especially this is magnified with small and minority businesses who have a very thin margins. Late payments, on the other hand, disrupt payroll, supplier payments, bonding capacity, and project schedules. And while some of the larger companies may have larger lines of credit, they're able to sustain until the payments come, the small businesses simply cannot survive. Maryland's existing prompt payment framework lacks uniformity, resulting in inconsistent enforcement and uncertainty. This bill modernizes and strengthens the payment protections across procurement, construction, and construction contracts by clarifying payment timelines, notice requirements, and recourse options. If any portion of the invoice is withheld, the paying party must still notify with written notice within 15 days explaining the reason. The incentives are unpaid amounts would at this point accrue, I think, interest of 2% per month beginning on the 61st day after receipt of the invoice. The contracts may not waive this. There are protections against forced unfunded work. Contractors and subcontractors may suspend work after notice if the payment is late without penalties. This bill does not prohibit legitimate payment disputes. It does not diminish owner oversight or quality control, does not add unnecessary administrative burden, and does not penalize good faith contract management. There are technical amendments attached that change the clarifying intent, prevent unintended consequences, and incorporate the stakeholder feedback received before the bill's introduction. And basically, as I said, this bill is to make sure that our small and minority businesses can compete with some of these larger businesses. Because if they don't get their payments on time, they cannot pay their workers. And we are always talking about, Madam Chair, the importance of workers. Well, our workers are nothing if they don't receive their paychecks. And if these small business owners cannot pay them on time, either the business goes defunct or the workers do not get paid. I believe this is a very important bill to protect both the workers and the small minority and business contracts. So I look forward to a favorable review of H. Bill 1352.
Hello, again, Karan Watkins with Harris Jones and Malone here on behalf of Maryland Minority Contractors Association with strong support for House Bill 1336. For many minority-owned and small construction firms, cash flow is vital to their business, and delays can have crippling effects on their sustainability, stability, and scalability. Many of the firms we represent must cover the cost of labor, materials, insurance, and equipment for weeks or months before they receive payment. Nevertheless, payment delays remain a persistent issue within the construction industry. The slow dissemination of payments permeates the construction ecosystem, contributing to project delays, work stoppages, and elevated financing costs. Many subcontractors report they do not have enough working capital to absorb unexpected payment delays, forcing many to rely on loans, credit, or personal funds just to keep projects moving. These delays disrupt payroll, delay purchasing materials, and ultimately slow project delivery. For many minority contractors, a delayed payment is not just an inconvenience. It can be the difference between staying in business and shutting its doors. And when a small construction firm closes, it doesn't just end a contract. It extinguishes the opportunity to build generational wealth and a lasting legacy for families and often disinvested communities. Delayed payments also affect Maryland taxpayers as contractors contractors often increase bid prices to offset the payment risk, raising project costs. In short, predictable payment schedules is good policy for contractors and for taxpayers. House Bill 1336 strengthens accountability, fairness, and transparency. These reforms help ensure that contractors who do the work are paid fairly and promptly. For Maryland to build a more inclusive construction economy, minority contractors must be able to compete, perform, and get paid on time. For these reasons, we urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Good afternoon once again, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Michael Adams on behalf of Associated Builders and Contractors in support of HB 1336 requiring prompt payment in construction contracts. The construction industry is hard. The work can be dangerous, the regulations can be onerous, the paperwork can be voluminous. When working on projects for the state of Maryland and for local jurisdictions, that burden increases even more. The members of ABC gladly take on this responsibility because they know that these projects are important and it is a privilege to work for our state and local governments. These contractors also know that these requirements do not disappear if the client on the project, whether that be a private entity or a state or local governmental entity, does not pay on time. When this happens, the employees still have to be paid for their hard work on time, insurance has to be paid on time, suppliers must be paid so the work stays on time and on budget. Contractors, general and sub, are often left holding this bag waiting for the owner to pay. Even worse, given the competition for future projects, many contractors do not feel comfortable speaking up to get paid on time or enforce interest provisions that may be part of the contract or waiving interest provisions that may be in statute but are waivable under the law. This has a very real downstream impact. This bill works to fix that issue by imposing reasonable requirements on whoever is dragging their feet on paying, whether that's the owner, the general contractor, or anywhere in the contracting chain, and whether that be state or local governments who are not getting the money where it needs to go and ultimately into the paychecks of our workers and getting our projects done on time. For those reasons, Associated Builders and Contractors would urge a favorable report.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Matt Defoe here on behalf of the Associated Builders and Contractors as well, in support of House Bill 1336. You have my written testimony. I'll try to be short. A lot of points have already been made, but this bill provides clear standards on two issues: establishing meaningful interest penalties for late payments, extending these protections to projects including public and private. And again, as noted, these provisions create fairness, transparency, and accountability in public and private contracting. The 2% monthly interest provision ensures that payment obligations are taken seriously and discourages unnecessary delay. I also will point out, and I mentioned last week, this committee has a great opportunity to really streamline and strengthen the procurement and payment to workers across the state. You have Delegate Adams' retention bill, which I believe got a subcommittee. You have Mr. Vice Chair's House Bill 193 as well. And then we look at it's almost a three-piece approach to really strengthen and robust our system. And with that, we work very closely with the Subcontracting Association and many other trade organizations on this bill over the interim. A lot of hard work, redrafting went into this bill. And with that, Madam Chair, we ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I know our virtual witness, Barry Glassman, is not with us today. With that, we'll open up for questions from the committee. Anyone want to take a bite at Delegate Wilson? Okay.
I'm here.
All right.
I'm gonna get you later, so.
With that, we will move on to our favorable with amendments. Thank you to the bill sponsor and the sponsor panel. We have here with us Andrew Griffin, Bruce Bariano.
Thanks, Madam Chair. For the record, Andrew Griffin here with the American Subcontractors Association of Baltimore. We are favorable to the amendments. Those amendments, as mentioned by the bill sponsor, are technical in nature and have been exchanged with his office. But like the bill, I won't belabor the points. From the subcontractor's point of view, the prompt pay issue is not new here. It may be slightly new to this committee. I think the bill before you is a culmination of work done between the generals and the subs in fixing a lot of the friction there. So the tolling, the non-waivable tolling interest, on the sub side, we always say when the general gets paid, we get paid. So we want to get the general paid, but we also need to hold every member of the tier responsible to the person below them. This does a great job of doing that. What else it does? Adding the notification provisions, both to the sub, why they may not be getting paid, why it may be withheld, so that they can remedy something to get paid. And then conversely, if someone is going to stop work, the notice provision tells somebody, hey, the notice alone should be enough to say, we need payment to flow down because folks are going to stop work. 2, and then 3, the stop work provision, last case scenario, but is really the only way the smallest guy on the job who virtually has no leverage in negotiating a contract to say, I haven't been paid for an extreme period of time, I shouldn't be forced to continue to show up. So with that, I would just urge a favorable report. I appreciate the bill and look forward to continuing to work on it.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Bruce Bariano. I'm here on behalf of the County Executive of Wycomico County in support of this legislation. We have a couple of clarifying questions, which I respectfully will take up with the sponsor of the bill. I don't want to take up the committee's time with it, but as you know, this bill does apply to local governments, Wycomico County being one of them, and I just need some clarifications from my client that I just received that I can discuss with the sponsor, and would urge a favorable report.
Thank you very much. Seeing if there's any questions for the committee. All right, seeing none, thank you both
Thank
for
you
your
very much.
testimony. We move on to unfavorable. We have with us today Carrington Anderson and Justin Fiore.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. Justin Fiore here on behalf of the Maryland Municipal League in opposition to House Bill 1336. You have our written testimony. I haven't seen any amendments yet, but this is a bill I did solicit quite a bit of feedback on from our members because I'm not a procurement expert myself. But unanimously, they say that the higher interest payment threats in the bill aren't a driving factor in prompt payment. It'll just raise costs on taxpayers in the case these happen. Our smaller and medium-sized towns did share concern about the 15-day notice window. Many of these smaller towns don't really have a full finance department. If they do, it's 1, maybe 2 staff members. In order to get the invoice in, get it out to the field departments, have them check the work, get it back, do the written notification. We may, in some cases, run into the challenge of the 15-day window. And then last, on the stop work provisions, some of our members mentioned stopping work due to a clerical or administrative error could result in public safety issues depending on the type of work being performed. So in short, kind of what may work for state agencies may not be as practical at the smaller levels of government. And so we'd ask for an unfavorable report on House Bill 1336.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Carrington Anderson here on behalf of the Maryland Association of Counties in respectful opposition to the bill as drafted. First, I want to say we absolutely agree that the contractors and subcontractors should be paid on time. I think across the board, for the most part, counties are doing this. Again, for the most part, there might be certain instances that if the sponsor or if the advocates have specific examples, happy to talk about that and figure out the issue that's happening there locally. I think one of our largest concerns with the bill is the ability for the contractor or subcontractor to be able to stop working, and then that contractor or subcontractor cannot be replaced. I think our concern there is from a public infrastructure project. Projects could be delayed. That also could include school construction, which is concerning to us. I think also it's difficult for a county government if the contractor is not paying the subcontractor. That's not really something that the county can control. And then for that subcontractor to stop working and not be able to be replaced, we have some concerns there. So I think we also have similar concerns in the state fiscal note. For these reasons, we would respectfully ask for an unfavorable report as drafted.
Thank you. I guess I do have some thoughts or questions, but so I guess in my mind I was thinking that at least the stop work provision provides some kind of balance between the contractor and the awarding entity, in your case, a county or a municipality. And so I'm wondering, like, when there's no leverage point in the scenarios that, or at least in the way that you're conveying it, there's no leverage points. Like, once the project is done, the worker, the contractor is waiting for payment, but you will have all the leverage though in those scenarios. So I'm not understanding where there's ever an opportunity to even the playing field.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. I do believe that there is an arbitration process if contractor or subcontractor isn't getting paid, but also happy to follow up with some of our procurement finance people to get some more details on that.
Okay. And then I'm just curious to know more, if you have any more information just about, because this conversation about late payment has been happening for long before I became chair and long before I even was elected. And so I'm just wondering, like, what are the improvements that have taken place for your members that are part of your organizations? But are you able to give the committee, especially a new committee of folks that this is one of the first times that they're hearing this topic, any information about what work's been done to help rectify the prompt payment issues?
Thank you again for the question, Madam Chair. I can ask some of our folks about that. I know I didn't specifically ask what have you changed over the last few years, but I have tried to delve into why does this happen, what are the circumstances under which it happens, and pretty regularly I got this really isn't a problem for us, like in most cases. Sometimes when this happens, it's because there are inaccuracies in the invoice, there are disputes about the work, or there's a failure to provide background supplemental information that may go along with the invoice. Obviously, on very rare occasions, there's some human error that can take place in all levels of transactions. But I do think that our members, by and large, I think one of our larger folks said something catastrophic would have to happen. National emergencies, catastrophic storms, like something really bad has to go wrong for us to end up in these scenarios, usually in local government. But I can try to get a sense of maybe for those who have had troubles, what they've done to remedy that. I can get that to you.
Okay, thank you. Delegate Fair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much. Friends, I feel like we're like having deja vu from yesterday. So I have kind of a similar vein of questions from the conversation that we had yesterday. Your concerns are that there can be delays due to information not being correct on the invoice, right? But that really is the government's job to respond in a timely fashion and get the corrections in place. And I feel like the bill has enough flexibility to address those concerns. Do you not think that the bill does address those concerns at all? They say, you think the bill says, like, even if the invoice is wrong, we're still just going to give you the money anyways? And
let me try to answer, and I'll ask Barrington if she has it as well. Again, I'm just not the procurement expert.
Sure.
But the feedback that I've received from my members is there are some rare cases in which this is challenging, and that maybe this isn't the right solution for some small governments.
Thank you for the question. I think, again, there are some aspects of this bill that are fair, and if there are issues happening locally, I think we do want that to be addressed. I think counties could get behind maybe the prompt payment mandate of 30 days. I think some of this might go too far, and maybe there's an avenue to have some amendments to try and put a little bit more balance, but still trying to ensure that the contractors and subcontractors get paid.
yeah, I guess I always struggle because we always look at these scenarios and say that it's got to be good enough for private industry, but then our public entities, the ones entrusted with the power and the money, are not expected to play by the same rules that private industry is playing by? Is that, I mean, I don't believe that that's your position. So can you clarify it for me so I can hear it a little bit better?
Yeah, thank you, Delegate, for the question. So again, I haven't gotten as much feedback on the instances maybe where counties haven't been paying. And so if there are specific instances there, which I'm sure that some of the proponents of the bill have some of those, would happy to look into those specifics. But we do agree, and the feedback that I have gotten is, by and large, they agree with the commercial net 30 payment and getting those payments in 30 days. So we do agree with that.
So getting that, and that, I guess that's where I'll finish on this, is the goal is that we are doing the right thing, I guess I struggle to understand why MACO and MML would come out and not support the bill in both conceptually and in writing if the counties and the cities and the municipalities are so sure that they're already doing the right thing. I don't understand where the opposition comes from. I'm really struggling with that.
Yeah, I do appreciate the question, Delegate. And this was, our legislative committee did vote to oppose this. I think particularly because this procurement article, or the sections that this addresses, this adds counties to it, so it's entirely new. So I think there's a lot of unknown there and a lot of new requirements that we're being subject to. So I think after we've had some more conversations, I think we're willing to work on some amendments to hopefully remove our opposition if we can get a little bit more flexibility there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Same page.
Thank you very much. Delegate Chisholm.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Carrie, I know this isn't your specialty, but you said sometimes you guys are smaller, so it takes you guys longer to react. And I have a hard time understanding that, because I understand when you're talking about federal government, you're talking about state government, people get caught in these bureaucratic messes, but you should be able to move much quicker. I only want you to take this back to your members, because I do get frustrated when I see 1,800 bills every year, and half of them are the same bills with the same problems. And this is my 8th year seeing this bill again, and I keep being told, well, we're fixing it, we're fixing it. I understand the pain that the contractors, subcontractors are going through, waiting to get paid and being strung out. But when we're talking about smaller governments, there's really no excuse, in my opinion, for them not to be able to handle these types of things, because they don't have the huge, I understand the personnel's probably smaller, but they should be able to react a little better and almost more in a more personal sort of communication. So if you can take that back to your members, is I don't quite understand how they're saying, well, we're smaller, so we can't react as quick.
Thank you, Delegate. I'm happy to take that back. I know a lot of times in these smaller jurisdictions, they're just wearing many different hats. It's not like this is their one job, but I'll take that back.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Sample Hughes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and some of the questions have already been asked, but I do want to just say this. So I started my career in municipality, and then of course then the county. So from where there may be a process to deal with the council at some point in this process at all, because they don't meet weekly, but I'm just curious, because I wanted to drill down on the 15-day angst that's there.
Thank you for the question, Delegate. I do have one comment. I don't have the municipality name here, but I'll just read verbatim what they wrote on this. The 15-day requirement may run counter to a municipality's expense approval cycle that would require all invoices to be approved at a regular meeting. So to your point, that may be some of the hang up in some of these smaller jurisdictions.
Okay, is that the same with MACO?
I think, yeah, one additional thing on top of that is the 15 days roughly would cut in half what is the current requirement. And so I think if that's being cut in half, that's going to increase the workload, that there are going to be some local governments, whether it's a county or municipality, that might not feel like they have the staff on hand to have an increased timeline, a compressed timeline for that.
Okay, yeah, if you can just definitively get us some information. Like I said, when I was working in Pocomoke City, I know we were busy, but we were small but mighty, and was able to respond accordingly and really, get the payments where they needed to be. So we appreciate any additional information.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. All right, thank you to the committee for the questions. Thank you to the witnesses. This concludes our bill hearing on HB 1336. We will move next to Delegate Kerr, HB 1173. And I think I have Donna Edwards, Alexandra Margorin, Tony Sines, Christian Goebel on the sponsor panel.
I'm sorry, Madam
Break-
Chair.
break or-
Tony Sines is unfortunately in the DBM personnel hearing.
Oh, okay, all right.
Thank you.
Thank you for the update.
Okay. Okay.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee. I am Delegate Ken Kerr. I'm here today to present House Bill 1173, which is a state procurement bill dealing with contractors and vendors and restrictions on use of state funds and resources. House Bill 1173 defines the uses and the prohibited uses of state funds by units of state government, vendors and contractors for collateral activities of employees. And under this bill, a unit of state government may not knowingly use public funds to influence the decision of state employees to support, oppose, or become members of an employee organization. A contractor or vendor contracted by a unit of state government may not knowingly use public funds to influence the decisions of employees to support, oppose, or become members of an employee organization that seeks to represent those employees. And a contractor or vendor contracted by a unit of state government may not knowingly use public funds to contract with any person for the purpose of carrying out a campaign against efforts of employees to gain or retain collective bargaining rights, to certify an employee organization as an exclusive representative, or to engage in anti-union activities. So a number of employee activities are exempted from this act when expenses are incurred to resolve grievances, to use state facilities, or to negotiate entering into an agreement with an employee organization. And I would like you now to hear from the panel, who can go into further detail and will be able to answer any of your questions. And I thank you for listening to my testimony.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Wells, members of the committee. My name is Christian Goebel. I serve as the Legislative and Political Coordinator with AFSCME Maryland Council 3, testifying in strong support of HB 1173. Our union represents approximately 55,000 public service workers across the state of Maryland, including city, county, state, and higher education. Our union thanks Vice Chair Kerr for sponsoring this legislation, which is incredibly timely and important for our union, and it provides important protection for workers throughout Maryland. I'd like to focus on why this legislation is needed. This past year, medical staff employed by Centurion at North Branch Correctional Institution and Western Correctional Institution voted to unionize with AFSCME Council 3. The Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, as many folks here may know, contracts with Centurion to provide medical and mental health services in Maryland's correctional and pretrial facilities. Workers at Centurion contacted our union with the hopes of forming a union. Workers cited short staffing, high turnover, overbearing workloads, and abrupt changes in shift schedule as reasons for wanting to form a union. And ultimately, they did vote to join us. However, during the course of the organizing campaign, Centurion engaged in an anti-union campaign in an attempt to prevent these workers from organizing. They sent mass texts and emails to workers urging them to vote no. Centurion obtained a union avoidance consultant to hold one-on-one and small group meetings with workers and lectured these workers on site at WCI and NBCI. Additionally, the company flew in top executives and lawyers to hold employer-sponsored large group meetings, again urging workers not to unionize. This conduct should not be tolerated from vendors or contractors who are providing services for our state government. Contractors and vendors should be focused on providing the services and obligations to our state under their contract. They should not be pushing anti-union messages on these workers. Moving forward, this legislation will aid in preventing this type of conduct from occurring again. We urge the committee to issue a favorable report on HB 1173. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Guillermo Zamora, reading on behalf of Jaime Contreras, our Vice President, and I'm replacing Alexandra Margarin. Dear Madam Chair Wells, Vice Chair Kerr, and members of the committee, thank you, Madam Chair, and the members of the Government, Labor, and Elections Committee for the opportunity to testify today in support of HB 1173, which will prohibit contractors and vendors who receive state funding from using that money on anti-union activities. SEIU 32BJ represents 185,000 members across 11 states and Washington, D.C., with over 4,000 members in Maryland. Our members provide essential services in public facilities, commercial and residential buildings, airports, and a variety of other locations. 32BJ supports HB 1173 because as an institution, we believe deeply in the right of everyday of every worker to choose whether to be represented by a union. When employers engage in anti-union scare tactics, they deprive their workers of the right to a free and fair union election. This strips workers of their voice and also the opportunity to improve their working conditions. The financial benefits of union membership for workers are well established. It is not only workers that benefit from strong unions, but the public at large. Service sectors are vulnerable to high worker turnover rates driven by low wages. High turnover can have a profoundly negative impact on facility safety. Less on-the-job experience may lead to more mistakes, accidents, or overlooked hazards. 32BJ has long worked to raise standards in the security and janitorial sector by organizing these workers and then negotiating collective bargaining agreements that boost wages and benefit levels, improve working conditions, and stabilize the workforce. Union membership is strongly correlated with higher compensation standards. Higher compensation standards reduce turnover, which results in more experienced workforce that is better able to maintain high security standards at public facilities.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm Donna Edwards. I'm president of the Maryland State and DC AFL-CIO. In 2023, you passed House Bill 984, and that bill prohibited state, county, and municipal agencies and departments from using public dollars to influence employees regarding whether they wanted to join or not join a union. HB 1173 simply extends the same standard to the contractors and the vendors who are working on behalf of the state through these agencies, and it only says exactly what we have said for state dollars use in our counties and our municipalities and our state. We're extending that to the contractors and the vendors, that you cannot use state fund for union busting, for anti-union conversations, and we've had the experience, particularly at our correctional facilities, where they had captive audience meetings during work hours, keeping the state employees from actually being able to do their duties. So I really appreciate the sponsor for bringing forward this legislation. It's something that is necessary, and now at the fiscal note, it does not affect the state operations or finances. It does not have an effect on small businesses, and this is the right time for it. So we ask for a favorable report on HB 1173.
Great, thank you so much to the bill sponsor and to your sponsor panel. I'm just seeing if we have any questions from the committee. Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for your testimony and for the bill. I love this bill. I just have a practical question, not really understanding like how contracting works, although I've been learning a lot this year. How do they know whether how can we know whether the dollars are from the state or not if a contractor receives money from more than one place? How is that segregated? Or
who wants? Well, Delegate Ruth, I have to admit, I don't know that procurement either. And I would say that it's probably just like what happens at the University of Maryland system, because we have put these same restraints on the University of Maryland, but they have foundation money, they have other money. I think what it is a red flag for vendors and contractors to say the state doesn't want to give taxpayer money, which, you know, almost a quarter of it is coming from unions and union households, to do anti-union conversations and captive audience.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. All right, seeing no more questions from the committee, that concludes the sponsor panel. We will move, we do have additional favorable witness, Ray Baker. I believe you are our last witness on this bill.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, committee. Again, for the record, my name is Ray Baker. I'm the Maryland Director of the Baltimore DC Building and Construction Trades Councils. Because this is a Friday afternoon and expedient with everyone's time, I agree with our prior panel. Thank you very much.
Phenomenal job. Might be the best Me Too of the session so far. Okay, that concludes our bill hearing on HB 1173. We will move on next to Delegate Solomon, who will be with us for 5 bills. And we'll start with HB 1422. It's a Solomon hour. Okay, and I think on 1422, Brian Tannen is supposed to be a virtual?
Yeah, I was going to say Brian Tannen, who's our chief auditor,
All
is
right.
unfortunately not able to make it with us in person, but he's going to be virtual,
Okay.
I think, on
And
most
who's-
of our joint audit bills.
Who's to your right, Delegate?
Ken Weaver, who's with
okay,
DLS and the Office
Yep.
of Legislative Audits.
Thank you.
And I have a bunch, so I'm just going to make sure I have all my stuff here appropriately. We're starting with 1422, you said?
Yes, HB 1422.
Excellent. Okay. Yes, it is Delegate Solomon Hour, or Joint Audit Committee Hour. I guess I should say that. So I want to just start off. In my other role, I serve as the House co-chair of the Joint Audits Committee, and that is a committee for you audit nerds that is made up of equal representation from the House and the Senate. My co-chair, Senator Hettleman, and I have been working really collaboratively with the Office of Legislative Audits, with folks at DLS, with the governor's team. I want to particularly recognize Hannah Dyer, who I think may be here or is probably watching, who I think you'll hear from at least on one or two of these bills, who's been taking the point in the governor's office on helping us work through these issues. Really the whole governor's team, as well as the Department of Budget and Management Secretary Weissman, who I know will be with us shortly or might actually be over in appropriations on the personnel budget section. But we, from the joint audit side and the executive branch side, have really been working collaboratively to address, frankly, a lot of issues that have been sort of long-standing issues that predate this administration, that go back sometimes multiple administrations of both parties. And so what was a huge priority for the Joint Audit Committee in a bipartisan, bicameral fashion, again, working with the governor's team, is really to get in the weeds and really look at fixing some issues that are particular to certain agencies, and you'll see that in some of these bills, but really try to look at more of a holistic approach and really think about how do we create better systems so that these issues don't continue to occur and we're not sort of playing whack-a-mole as stuff comes up. And so, these bills sort of look at addressing that often whole cloth. We think this package of bills, 4 that you're going to hear today, and there are 2 additional Joint Audit Committee bills that are in the Health Committee jurisdiction, but came out of these conversations. We know they're not going to solve everything. Again, these are issues that go back sometimes decades through, again, multiple administrations of both parties. Our state government is really wonderful. It's also really complex and complicated, and we've undergone a lot of change, obviously, in the last decade or so. And so sometimes we need to make sure that our laws and our systems reflect those changes, and that as times change, that we're updating them appropriately. I think broadly, this is about making sure, one, that our tax dollars are being used efficiently and effectively, that state government is working efficiently and effectively for Marylanders, whether it's somebody who's trying to get a background check to get a job, somebody who's trying to get an occupational health license in any number of different entities, or someone who wants to make sure that, again, a system is working the way it's supposed to. And then I think lastly, this package of bills is really about protecting Marylanders. In particular, one of these bills we'll get into on background checks. We also, again, one of the other bills that's in the Health Committee is on our occupational boards. It's really about making sure that we are protecting Marylanders, that we're protecting children, we're protecting our seniors, and we're protecting our most vulnerable family members who have disabilities. And again, I think the committee, in a bipartisan fashion, has really done a good job in trying to address a lot of these issues. 3 of these bills are cross-filed currently with our partners in the Senate, and the Joint Audit Committee on Monday chose to officially recommend the bills, obviously, to the standing committees in both chambers. The other three bills are being worked on collaboratively just for timing purposes. Obviously, as you all know, our drop deadline in the House is a few days after, and a lot of these issues, particularly some of the audits that came out later in the year, we were working, and you will see in some of what I'm presenting, these are a little bit of a moving target. There's a bill as introduced, but we have continued to have conversations throughout the session, again, with our partners in the agency, and in the governor's office on tweaks to these things. And as things have been analyzed, we realize some stuff's just not quite ready. So these other three bills are also joint audit products. They're just not cross-filed because of timing. So that's sort of the framing of these packages and overall. And now I will get into the specifics of House Bill 1422, which particularly looks at state fiscal leadership capacity. And that really gets at, in particular, how do we make sure that as we see sort of repeat audit findings across the board on, things that I think many of us would believe we should be tightening up around, just fiscal systems and federal reimbursements, that we have people and we have the proper training in those positions for folks to be able to do these jobs adequately. And so what we do in this bill is a couple of things. First, we define what a CFO is, and actually that definition will probably change a little bit. We spelled it out in the bill, but I think we're going to move towards something more reflective of sort of a highest ranking fiscal officer in an agency, because not every agency has officially designated a CFO. And then we outline what we think are best practices. And again, this has been a little bit of a moving target as we've worked with DBM to make sure that we're not leaving something out, really defining what do we believe are the adequate, sorry, the word just went right out of my health, requirements or set of background and experiences for somebody to be a CFO. Because these agencies often have budgets of, as we indicate in this bill, we set the threshold in the initial draft at $2 billion. That is also a little bit of a moving target because there are a couple of agencies we want to make sure are officially included. And obviously their budgets fluctuate annually, so we want to make sure that we are including sort of the biggest agencies in state government, but really that folks who are responsible at the end of the day for the fiscal stewardship of these agencies, that they have the correct level of experience to be able to do that. You wouldn't want to hire a CFO for a multi-billion-dollar company who had never been an accountant or had never managed that kind of money. And we want to make sure, again, not casting aspersions on anybody currently in those roles, we just want to make sure we're hiring adequate people. We also made sure that I think we've heard a lot, and I know we heard this a lot, certainly in the Appropriations Committee, that sometimes it's difficult for the state government to be able to hire people who have these incredible qualifications, because when you look at what an equivalent position as a CFO, or what we did was we added in Chief Information Officer, when you look at what state governments are able to pay these folks, often to what the private sector is able to pay, it's not equivalent. And so you often are asking somebody to, do it out of the kindness of their heart, which, obviously the state government is never going to be able to compete with the private sector, nor should we, because it's a very different mission. But we also know that we need to be competitive. And when you are looking at competitive markets, we wanted to be able to give the DBM secretary a little bit more authority and leeway, obviously not without guardrails, but we do put provision in this bill that says, folks can be, the DBM secretary and the executive branch have a little bit more leeway in terms of pay schedule for these incredibly important high-ranking positions, where again, if you have somebody there who is not handling things appropriately, these are mistakes often that can cost the state millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. And so, we view a lot of this as being proactive instead of reactive. The other piece that is in here is something that you've heard me talk a lot about, in a lot of the agencies that come before our committee around liquidated damages. And so what we have added in, and I don't believe it's reflected in the draft bill or the bill that's before you, but it's in an amendment that we're working on, is I think the liquidated damage piece is in there, but we're still tweaking it a little bit, is making sure that agencies have to report to the Board of Public Works when they proactively make a decision not to go forward on claiming liquidated damages. And again, this is not about casting aspersions on anybody. This is about making sure that when agencies make those decisions, that we don't find out about them after it's too late. And I think we saw that often in audits where, for one reason or another, the decision was made by an agency or department chair, or where they didn't go after liquidated damages, and maybe that was not the right decision, or there could have been a better path forward. But often, because those audits are reflective and often occur multi-years later, and the audit sequence, as I think most of you know, is every 3 years. It's too late, right? Some of it, well, we've missed the window of opportunity. And so, we tried to be cognizant of procurement rules and make sure that we would not put any incredibly onerous burdens on contracting. We want state government to be nimble. We want agencies to still be able to do, best practices in their area. And obviously, the Board of Public Works itself, we are the only state that has a Board of Public Works that acts as sort of that ultimate backstop where there is some final level of approval from, 3 of the most prominent statewide elected officials, or appointed officials, as the treasurer is, technically elected by the General Assembly. We want to make sure that that Board of Public Works has the opportunity to weigh in and say, in a public setting, because obviously the Board of Public Works, their agendas are public, these decisions are made, in public meetings. We want to make sure that if an agency believes there was no reason to go after liquidated damages because of a failure of a contract or what have you, that is public. And that we as the General Assembly have an opportunity to see that, the members of the public have an opportunity to see that. And so that's a really important provision that is in our House Bill 1422 that I think is another very good governance provision to make sure that we're addressing the sort of issues where we find that liquidated damages were not pursued, often when they are clearly in the contract, and they're not pursued until, and we don't discover that until after the fact and it's too late. The other piece I'll highlight is, again, I just want to really lift up the work of the governor. There is $2 million in a dedicated purpose account in the budget as proposed that is specifically around sort of state fiscal leadership capacity and working to make sure that our state workers who are in these positions, not just as a CFO role, but in similarly senior fiscal leadership roles, are given the proper training, get the updates that they need, are kept current with what they need to do their jobs as well as possible. And so, some of what's in here will also be supplemented by what the Department of Budget and Management intends to do with the money that's in that dedicated purpose account. So with that, I am going to urge a favorable report, and I know Brian, our state's chief auditor, is here as well to just give a quick overview, and then Ken is here for any questions.
Well, yeah, if questions Brian was going to basically answer.
Oh, you know what? Actually, Brian is here for informational pieces as well, so that's actually perfect.
Thank you, Delegate. Now, are you taking questions on the entire package of bills at this point?
No. Well, I was going to say, I think we're going to do one bill at a time.
Okay. So we are.
I gave sort of the broad overview, but I think.
So at this point, we're going to talk about 1422?
Yep.
Okay. Questions on 1422, Delegate Sample Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Delegate, for the bill, and thank you for the overall knowledge and the work that's been done on all the bills, actually. But just wanting to understand the liquidated damages piece, where it currently states that that it may be collected for specific violations around the Minority Business Enterprise Program, the state's prevailing wage, and the state's living wage law. Does that, well, that's current, but does it expound upon in the new bill, in the new law, or is that still within that same parameter?
Correct. Yeah. So the General Assembly passed a bill from Senator Lamb, who at that point was the Senate co-chair of the Joint Audits Committee, broadening some of the requirements around including liquidated damage provisions in contracts, and sort of created best practices around when liquidated damage provisions should be included in contracts, but it didn't sort of mandate anything. again, we were trying to be cognizant of procurement law and the procurement systems. So what this would do is not change where they're required or when they're required or the type of liquidated damages. This would just say that if you have a contract that contains a liquidated damage provision, so it sort of builds on the work in 2023, that if your contract has a liquidated damage provision in it and you have decided not to pursue them in an event of a breach of the contract, you now have to tell the Board of Public Works. So some agency head or department head has to go to the BPW and say, because what we see is, these contracts were not successful, and, you'll see in the audits, it sort of says, well, the agency made a decision not to pursue any damages around this. And we're often left after the fact saying, well, could you expand on that? Why was that decision made? The AG's office sort of says, well, we usually follow the agency's lead because we're their lawyers. We will do what they ask us to do. And this just merely says that if you have a breach, somebody's got to go to the BPW and explain, look, this was a breach on both sides, or maybe the system didn't work properly and nobody could have anticipated that. So we have made the decision, we don't hold the contractor liable, we're moving forward. That's all this does.
Okay, thank you so much for the clarification.
Delegate Fisher.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Delegate Solomon, I know that you're trying to solve a lot of problems here, so I just do want to recognize that. My question is, there do seem to be, I guess, and you're on the Joint Audit Committee, I know that's obviously a thankless job, an important job, but a thankless one. So I just want to recognize that as well. It does seem like a lot of the departments we're hearing time and again are failing audits for a variety of reasons, and I know that no one sitting here is responsible for that. You guys are responsible for just providing the information. Is this something that's been ongoing for a long time, or is it more of a recent phenomenon?
No, well, and Delegate Fisher, I appreciate the question. I had a thinking suspicion you might have some questions today for the rest of the afternoon. No, these are, frankly, a lot of these issues are long-standing. Again, they go back sometimes multiple decades, and are issues that have sort of plagued state government through multiple administrations. So we've seen some of them get worse lately. But I will say the audits that we have now are audits that are coming from the previous administration, in all honesty, and I think we're just trying to clean things up. We're not trying to cast blame on anybody. We're just saying the buck stops here. Regardless of who it is, we need to make sure that state government is working better for Marylanders.
And then, no, I appreciate that. And when there is a look into the proper function of the different departments and procurement and how to make things better, are there sometimes things that you all find where there's just too much duplication? Because my sense is, and in no way am I going to give any specific example at the moment, but just being on this committee for a short time and reading what I've read over the past few years, just seems to be so much duplication in so many different ways, which might in and of itself cause confusion and cause failure. And I know it's incredibly unpopular and you can't probably comment on this because of where you're from, but at the federal level, you have DOJ. Of course, it's phenomenally unpopular in the state of Maryland for a variety of reasons. I understand that. But nonetheless, there was a recognition that there are a lot of things that were being duplicated. And I have no doubt that that's the case in Maryland as well. And a Republican has to be the Republican and actually say it the way it is, which is, how do we fix, how do we in a state like Maryland, which is basically a one-party state, truly fix state government in a way that you have more streamlined processes and less duplication? And how can we help?
Yeah, look, I think that is a really fair question. And frankly, I don't think efficiency and good stewardship of tax dollars should be a partisan issue. My constituents pay their tax dollars like everybody else. And while I may have more Democrats in my district than you do, I don't think they love paying their taxes necessarily anymore. They want to know that their money is going to the right place and that it's being used efficiently and effectively. And so it shouldn't be, efficiency shouldn't be a bad word. And actually, we do have, I hate to describe them as sort of Maryland's Doge, because as you said, Doge has a very negative connotation among some folks, and a lot of issues with Doge that could have gone a whole lot better, but we won't get into that. But we have the Office of Program Evaluation and Government Accountability. It's called OPEGA. I like to describe them more as sort of like Maryland's internal consultants. So they're part of DLS, and they are a team of about 6 or 7 people who each year are often tasked by the presiding officers, by committee chairs. It's one of the few not thankless perks of being the joint audit chair is sometimes you get to direct them as well. But OPEGA goes into these agencies in collaboration, not in opposition, but in collaboration with the General Assembly, in collaboration with the agencies, and says, looks under the hood, how can we work these processes better? What can we do to make them more efficient? And so I'll give you 2 examples with OPEGA. We worked really closely with them when I was on the Appropriations Committee, when I was the vice chair of the Education and Economic Development Subcommittee. We had them do a wholesale review of the state's financial aid grant system. And so the GA and EA grants, as most of us know them. And they did like incredible data analysis and came back with a whole new way of evaluating these grants that has dramatically increased the completion rate of the people who get the grants. They recommended a legislative fix for the committee. We adopted that. It was a bill that we worked on with Chair Barnes and Delegate Smith a couple of years ago. We added money to the grant system, and then we changed some of the thresholds and the requirements for them. And we've seen the completion rate for those students getting those grants skyrocket. There's a bill that I have in the Ways and Means Committee that came out of an OPEGA report around childcare. This will be music to your ears. I should have asked if you wanted to co-sponsor it. It is a regulatory relief bill specifically for the childcare industry. And it came out of a report where we asked OPEGA last year. We've been hearing some really unfortunate stories about licensure delays and all this other stuff. And we said, go in there, work with MSDE, figure out what's not working and what we can tweak. And this bill's recommendations, a lot came from OPEGA. And then we have another bill that came out of these audit conversations. It's one of the ones that's going to the Health Committee that is going to create a work group to look at how we streamline the occupational boards. There's about 25 of them. Some of them are really good and very efficient in terms of their operations. Some of them have some improvements. And so we are creating a work group to look specifically at how to streamline, how to make those more efficient, and also how to create a little bit more oversight from the Maryland Department of Health to make sure those boards are, we don't need 25 IT systems for those boards. Some of the boards are still using paper forms.
Got it. Thank you.
Delegate Tomlinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the part of the bill that I'm most interested in is the final or the last page of the bill, page 4, where it talks about the liquidated damages, and you obviously spoke on that for a little bit. I'm just trying to figure out how this actually plays out in how this will actually look if the bill is passed. So just in general, with liquidated damages, this is one of the things that in my day job that I guess I'm frustrated with a lot of times when I hear conversations down here, when I look at what I do, during the outside of session. So especially as it relates to MBE goals, we'll talk about. So MBE goals, it's a big focus down here in the General Assembly. Why aren't the goals met? And there's a clause in every contract that has an MBE. Am I getting?
It's like the Academy Awards.
Yeah, did I go too long?
I mean, your question was
all right,
too long.
All right. Thank you, guys. I'll be. What just happened?
Big ups to God.
Anyways, I'm just gonna go home from there. So one of the big things down here that the folks are bothered by, and rightfully so, are when we don't meet our MB goals on contracts. And there's a clause in every contract that has an MB goal that says that every contract that has an MB goal has to have liquidated damages. And one of the issues that I see over and over again is that, quite frankly, we don't, or state agencies, they don't actually go after contractors that don't meet their MB goals, even though there are liquidated damages. So in that case, like, I'm on board with what you're doing here. I've had these conversations over the years. I've seen Baltimore City, when they've got contractors who don't meet their goals, they aggressively go after them. And as a state, we generally don't. I don't know who's to blame for that. I don't know if it's the individual procurement offices. Is it the contract manager? Or is it the head of the agency? Is it the Attorney General's office who provides counsel to all agencies? I'm not entirely sure. But as it relates to this section of the bill, I guess, like, how do you envision this actually playing out? As in, who initiates? I mean, who's identifying that the liquidated damages hasn't been applied? And is this more on the agency, the Attorney General's office that provides the counsel? Because it's a joint effort, actually, within the agency. And what does it look like going before the board? I mean, is it an agenda item? I don't know.
Yeah, I think all of that is to be determined and to work out. My understanding in talking, I had a conversation with the Attorney General earlier this year, specifically on the liquidated damages piece. And the way he explained it to me was the agency works in consultation with their AG representative, but ultimately it is the agency's decision. So the AG acts as their lawyer, and they take their lead. You know, they may give a recommendation saying, you know, you're on solid legal footing here, or we don't think you are, based on the conditions of the contract and the conditions of whatever, happened during the work period. But ultimately it is whether it's the department, the sub-department head, or the secretary themselves, they're the ones that make the decision. And so, I mean, I think we would have to, we didn't want to be overly prescriptive in here, but obviously all of these bills are still works in progress as they work their way through the committees. If there's a better or clearer way for us to do this, we know the comptroller's office is reviewing these as well. But I think, again, my understanding is that it is ultimately the agency official, not the AG's office, that makes a decision one way or the other, whether to go after liquidated damages.
Can you make it quick? We've got a lot to get
Sorry.
through.
Yeah, I assume the intent.
Go ahead and rekey it. Yeah. Wrong one, okay.
I assume the intent here is you're trying to motivate the agencies to just apply, just to actually move forward with the liquidated damages, correct?
I mean, ultimately, what we want is, I mean, when it is necessary, and there's one agency where it was sort of, to your point about MBE, it was pretty clear, cut and dry, like either you met a threshold in the contract or you didn't. And if you didn't meet that threshold, you were supposed to pay monthly liquidated damages. We had an audit with that agency where they brought that to light. It was DPSCS. It was the healthcare contract. We just heard about Centurion. And it was like pretty cut and dry, right? Like if you're not meeting your healthcare staffing threshold, as you agreed to in your contract, you are supposed to pay the state a liquidated damage provision, because the state then has to go out and hire people to fill it in, and they weren't collecting it. And we didn't know that until we saw the audit. So we were like, you're going to start doing this. I mean, the appropriations committee weighed in and we're like, we want a monthly report on what you're getting. So, whether it's warranted or not, we believe this added transparency. If somebody's got to go before the board and publicly state, if there was no issue, fine. But if there was and they miss it, they've got to own that publicly.
Delegate Solomon, did you intend for the Office of Legislative Audits, Brian Tannen, to be on your sponsor panel?
Brian's here for questions.
Okay, all right. So he was not going to testify. Any further questions for the sponsor panel? Okay, we have some favorable with amendments. So let me call up Dana Phillips and Hannah Dyer.
I was going to say, and Secretary Weissman texted me. He is on virtually, as you see.
Okay. Hello, Secretary.
Afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair. How are you, sir?
Okay, well, go ahead.
Yeah, I also want to pull up, I believe, Asma Mirza from our governor's office of.
They're making their way up. Okay,
perfect.
We have them now.
And I think, Mr. Vice Chair, we had spoken to the chair about having Ms. Mirza go first and give an overview as to the work of the executive branch on audits. She'll only testify this one time to give that overview, and then I'll launch into testimony favorable with amendments on this bill. And Ms. Dyer is just here to help us with questions.
Okay, thank you. Please go ahead.
Great. Thank you so much, Chair Wells, Vice Chair Carr, and members of the committee. And thank you for the opportunity to speak in favor of House Bill 1422 and how this relates to the administration's broader strategy to address audit findings. Before I begin, I'd also like to thank Delegate Solomon for his leadership on this issue. Since my appointment as Chief Performance Officer in 2023, the Governor's Office of Performance Improvement has been working behind the scenes to improve the operations of Maryland state government in select areas using a data-driven, heart-led approach. We hold agencies accountable to improving performance, such as cutting environmental permitting timelines by 25%, cutting wait times for veterans by 50%, and sharing data better across agencies to serve hundreds of thousands of more children in need. While our team adds an added layer of accountability and support, ultimately agencies are the experts and responsible for their performance improvements. Now, as of earlier this year, Governor Moore is using that same approach to improve fiscal responsibility in Maryland state government and hold people more accountable. For Governor Moore, fiscal responsibility is a cornerstone of his administration's service to Marylanders. He recently reinforced this priority through a statewide directive on February 6th to his cabinet to review and enhance audit resolution procedures across state agencies in order to strengthen fiscal oversight and responsibility. Our goal with this work is to elevate the importance of fiscal responsibility, dig deeper and identify and resolve the root causes, and build agency capacity to do this work long term. To do so, the governor's memo laid out 5 directives to his cabinet, which I'll briefly summarize here for the committee, as well as give an update on our progress since that memo went out. First, within 60 days, cabinet secretaries must complete a review of their agency processes that monitor resolution of issues identified through state and federal agency audits. Agencies should identify and implement ways to improve these processes. And to support these efforts, the Department of Information Technology will pilot an internal management tool to better track findings, inquiries, and associated corrective actions. Second, within 60 days, cabinet secretaries must review recent audit findings and identify areas that can be resolved without significant additional resources. Secretaries should prioritize areas to address, considering factors such as risk, resources, and times to address. Since the governor's directive 3 weeks ago, we've already made significant progress. Myself, Chief Davis, Secretary Weissman, leaders from AFCU, agency deputy chiefs of staff have already met individually with 6 cabinet secretaries and their teams to learn about their agency processes, and I'm late to the next 2 meetings that we're going to have on this topic, but excited for those conversations later today. These meetings are robust, frank conversations about how agencies are managing their audit findings, what improvements are already made, and what improvements they plan to make forward. It's also an opportunity to have these conversations not just at the staff level, but to elevate them to secretaries and identify common themes across agencies. In addition to these meetings, this topic has been on the cabinet agenda for the last 3 cabinet meetings, including the one this morning that I facilitated. The third part of the governor's directive is that within 180 days, cabinet secretaries must assess repeat audit findings and identify where additional resources are needed, which could include assessing root causes for repeat findings and potential solutions. Should the General Assembly approve the governor's proposed $5 million in FY 2027 that is dedicated to addressing repeat audit findings, agencies will submit resource requests to DBM to review their proposals. Fourth, AFCU within DBM will regularly convene agencies to develop a community of practice to share best practices, tools, and techniques for strengthening fiscal and programmatic oversight, building upon the governor's 2027 proposal to add 2 new additional positions to the unit. Since the beginning of the year, AFCU has already convened this group 3 times. To enhance the performance of our state agencies, the group is creating a guide to help follow up on and monitoring of corrective actions. Secretary Weissman has been collaborating with sponsors on amendments to House Bill 1369 to further enhance AFCU's role in supporting agency efforts to resolve audit findings. Fifth and final, should the General Assembly approve the governor's proposed $2 million investment that the delegate referenced earlier, DBM will assist in recruiting high-skilled workers with technical expertise in fiscal management to help agency leadership implement better fiscal and operational practices, and the bill we're discussing here today will guide those efforts. We look forward to working with members of this committee, other members of the General Assembly, DLS, OLA, good to see Brian again, to improve the state's operations and uphold that sacred trust of managing taxpayer dollars. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you very much. Delegate, I just wanted to confirm, that we're on 1422 or 13? Okay.
We're on, 1422.
all right,
I was
but-
planning on doing 1369 next.
Okay, got it. Okay. Seeing no questions from the committee, are there other folks here to testify on this bill? Oh, there-
Secretary
Weissman,
Weissman.
okay. Yes, Secretary Weissman.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. It's my first time before this committee today. And I'm thrilled to work with you all. For the record, Jake Weissman, Secretary, Department of Budget and Management. And thank you for allowing me to testify virtually and hopefully not get anybody else sick with what I've got. I want to begin by thanking the sponsor for the collaborative conversations we've had on this bill. Throughout this process, our discussions have not been about whether the goals are worthwhile. We share the same objectives of strong financial management, meaningful accountability, and effective oversight of state resources. Instead, our work together has focused on implementation and making sure these policies function well in practice, can be sustained over time, and ultimately strengthen state government operations. I'm here today testifying favorable with amendments on House Bill 1422 concerning the hiring of CFOs for high fund agencies. We are finalizing amendment language with the sponsor, in which we've been able to take many steps to reach consensus on important issues, including how we preserve continuity and institutional knowledge. In addition, we are working on refining the definition of a CFO in the bill, as the sponsor mentioned, so it reflects actual executive financial leadership responsibilities rather than relying solely on titles or short acting appointments. We've also discussed clarification around establishing pay scales, as well as considering other recruitment challenges to reflect the reality that the state is competing in a national market for high-level financial and technological talent. Similarly, we've had productive discussions around reframing minimum qualifications to ensure strong professional standards while avoiding overly rigid statutory requirements that could unintentionally exclude highly qualified candidates, and having our incredible team at OPSB work with the staff in the Comptroller's office in ensuring criteria which will make certain that we have strong CFOs at these critical agencies. Finally, we appreciate the ongoing conversations about reporting provisions. Accountability is essential, but reporting requirements must be clear, achievable, and aligned with existing oversight structures so that agencies can focus resources on managing finances effectively rather than navigating duplicative processes. Our team has worked with the folks on the Comptroller's General Accounting Division with some proposed changes, which will ensure the intent of the sponsor is met while striking the critical balance. Again, thank you to the sponsor and the Joint Committee for working with us, and we look forward to working with the committee for the passage of this legislation.
Thank you, Secretary Weissman. Are we moving next to Mr. Tannen?
He's just here for
Okay.
informational. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right, seeing no questions from the committee, I believe that concludes the hearing on HB 1422. All right, we'll move next to 1369. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah. I think we'll do this dance again in another 3 minutes. And
So
I
just
will-
so I'm 1 second, Delegate, just to be clear, I have Dana Phillips, Hannah Dyer, and then Brian Tannen, who's all for information, or?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
I think
Oh,
Secretary Weissman, Dana was supposed to be Secretary Weissman.
Okay.
perfect. And
So-
Ken, you're welcome to.
Secretary Weissman, not Dana.
Correct.
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
And Ken Weaver is here for informational purposes as well. So similar to, I gave the overview. I guess I should start. For the record, Delegate Solomon presenting House Bill 1369, again, on behalf of the Joint Audit Committee. This is, again, one of the cross-filed bills with our partners in the Senate that the Audit Committee did vote to recommend to the standing committees earlier this week. This bill essentially codifies what is already an existing unit in the Department of Budget and Management, but doesn't exist formally in statute. It formally creates the Audit and Finance Compliance Unit, the AFCU. And essentially, I know in the interest of time, obviously I'm happy to take questions, but I will not bore you with every detail that is in this bill. But suffice it to say, in codifying the AFCU, the entire purpose of this entity now in DBM is to work collaboratively across state government with agencies to fix their audit findings. That is it. Obviously, we want them to focus on the agencies that have the highest number of repeat findings, that have the most egregious findings, but it is about creating an entity and codifying an entity and strengthening an entity within state government to make sure that when audits occur and when things are found that need to be reviewed and fixed, that they are. And again, as you heard from Ms. Mirza, and you're going to hear from Secretary Weissman again shortly, we're already doing this, and the governor has taken a very proactive approach. Secretary is going to talk about the $5 million dedicated to purpose account that, again, was put in the governor's budget that I know is a priority for the speaker, as well as our chamber considers the budget. And, you know, this is really critical to make sure that there are, even if there is an administration that may not be as keen on addressing audit findings going forward, that we have created this entity, that we have codified this entity, that we have outlined its purposes. The piece that I will just lift up, you know, we outline a dashboard in the legislation. We're working to create a mechanism, and I think we're still sort of trying to fine tune what the mechanism would be to make sure that there is adequate and open lines of communication for those nerds on the committee as well who do read the audits. There is always a section at the end of every audit on the findings that has a specific timeline that is agreed to between the agency and the audit team about when the findings are going to be addressed. So we already sort of have a mechanism. It's just making sure, frankly, that there are, again, regular reporting schedules between the entities, that information is then being conveyed to not only the AFCU, but the General Assembly. And so, you know, as you heard on the previous bill, we're still just trying to sort of fine tune some of this language. But again, the spirit of this is setting up an entity that sole purpose is to make sure that state agencies are addressing their audit findings, working more efficiently, and working in collaboration with the Office of Legislative Audits that then reports to the General Assembly and the Joint Audit Committee to make everything better. And with that, I would urge a favorable report.
Secretary Weissman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. Again, I want to thank the sponsor and the Joint Committee for their partnership on this bill and for our shared commitments on addressing these issues. Here testifying today favorable with amendments on House Bill 1369, and I want to recognize my colleague, Joan Peacock, who is in the audience, who I know is familiar to committee members. Joan and her small team at AFCU have provided assistance to many of our agencies. And as the chair mentioned, as the sponsor mentioned, we have already requested 2 additional pins in the budget to strengthen that work, as well as $5 million in the dedicated purpose account to make sure that we can address repeat audit findings as they come up, whether it's the root causes or the individual issues. I appreciate the sponsor's recognition of the importance of AFCU and looking to codify their successful approach and expand the amount of positions in the unit to ensure the work the committee is looking for can be fully accomplished. While we are finalizing amendment language with the sponsor, we have been able to take steps to reach consensus on important issues. We appreciate the resolution over separation of powers concerns, the continued discussions on operational flexibility, and finding ways to cut down on the expense of the bill. Adjusting requirements such as the mandatory sample testing to allow action as needed recognizes the professional judgment required in audit work and helps ensure resources are directed where the risk is greatest. Similarly, removal of the specialized team is a recognition of the work that AFCU already performs and avoids any unnecessary waste. The replacement of the proposed public dashboard, as the sponsor said, we're still discussing this, about the coordinated reporting approach involving the Joint Committee, OLA, and DBM. Transparency remains a shared priority, and I appreciate the discussions that we've had on using biannual reports, as well as action plans to be reported to AFCU in replacement. This approach better balances transparency with data accuracy, federal compliance considerations, and practical implementation realities. We look forward to continuing these conversations as we work together to calibrate the approach to these bills, ensuring that timelines are realistic, responsibilities are clearly defined, and agencies have the flexibility needed to successfully implement the reforms envisioned by the legislation. Again, thank you to the sponsor and the Joint Committee for working with us. We look forward to working with you for passage of these bills.
Thank you very much. Just making sure there's no one else to testify. Okay, great. All right. Opening up for questions to the committee. All right, seeing no questions from the committee, this concludes our bill hearing on HB 1369. Next, HB 1557.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just making sure I got my notes. Perfect. That was the order that I was going to go in as well. I think it's just Ms. Dyer with me here today on this one, and then Mr. Weaver and Mr. Tannen are here for informational purposes as well. So this is a bill, again, Delegate Solomon, for the record, House Bill 1557, addressing some issues that were raised in a Department of General Services audit at the end of last year around some of the reporting mechanisms and just clarity around some of the real estate work that had been done. And so the bill that you see before you is in some ways a little, well, in many ways was a little onerous. And so we have been working really collaboratively again with DGS and with the governor's team to come up with something that does not run afoul of our procurement system, that does not create, we heard from our colleague, we don't want to create more inefficiency and duplication. And so the spirit in this legislation was to create essentially an advisory board of outside experts that could help DGS do its jobs better. To sort of look broadly at the landscape of real estate as they consider leases that often last sometimes up to a decade and can be quite costly, whether it's leases, whether it's purchases of property, whether it's the sale of property. Obviously, in some jurisdictions we have a number of pretty large parcels of state-owned land and state property that we want to talk about redeveloping or turning into more useful purposes as our footprint in state government shrinks. And so we have taken what's in here and sort of tried to streamline it a little bit that is more of an advisory commission and less of sort of another layer of procurement that is a little bit duplicative of the role of the Board of Public Works. And so there's an amendment that we're working on right now that keeps the spirit of the commission and also makes sure that there is this, again, outside entity of experts to provide support to DGS, to look at DGS's work and portfolio. The commission would also be responsible for essentially reviewing DGS's sort of long-term real estate plan at least once a year, and then providing that review and their opinions to the General Assembly. One of the other pieces that we plan on adding into the amended bill is there's a section of Procurement Code 10-305 that provides oversight from the Legislative Policy Committee, which, as you all know, is made up of the presiding officers from both chambers and the subcommittee, the standing committee chairs, and members from minority leadership as well. And so there's reporting provisions in that section of code that the LPC can request. We want to clarify some of those reporting provisions to make it abundantly clear when the presiding officers and the LPC are requesting information that there are certain things in particular that we would want the LPC to be given. There's also a section of COMAR around essentially giving DGS the ability to offer leases up to 15% of fair market value. We want to put a few more guardrails on that. We don't believe in the data that we found that we're anywhere near that. That is a vestige of years and years and years and years ago. Again, we find things in COMAR that have been on the books for a long time, and we're just trying to, I think in this package, also clean some things up. And so we're looking at making some tweaks to that COMAR provision as well. So again, we don't have the amendments finalized yet. A lot of this, again, has been really collaborative work between presiding officers, teams, the Joint Audit Committee, and the agencies and the governor's team. So with that, I will urge a favorable report on the bill that we eventually amend and turn it over to Ms. Dyer.
Thank you. And good afternoon, Hannah Dyer, Deputy Legislative Officer for the Governor. So we again appreciate the sponsor and the Joint Audit and Evaluation Committee for the collaborative partnership around this bill and the others that the sponsors mentioned today. We share the Joint Committee's goals and really the legislature's goals of strong financial management, meaningful accountability, and effective oversight of state resources. We support the intent of this bill to expand the state's access to real estate expertise, but request that the bill be amended, as the sponsor described, to clarify the committee's role as an advisory body that makes recommendations about industry trends, developments, and movement in the commercial real estate sector and best practices for asset management rather than exercising authority over individual transactions. I'll just keep it very short and sweet because I think the sponsor did a great job. We appreciate the value an advisory committee of industry experts can bring to upholding these standards and advising the state on longer-term industry trends and state real estate goals.
Great, thank you very much, Ms. Dyer, and to the bill sponsor, Delegate Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Subcommittee Chair. Thank you all for coming. Really appreciate everyone's work on this and the Joint Audit Committee and everyone doing this thankless work. A couple questions on this, and obviously I have not really seen the amendments or anything like that, but I did a little bit of research into kind of how other states handle this issue of kind of long-term leases and waiving exit rights. And it seems like most states, Virginia is one, California, Washington State, have stronger oversight, essentially. So some states, for example, require legislative approval instead of just documentation for leases that exceed some defined term or that waive exit rights. And I know this bill, I guess, is in an original form, and maybe it's being watered down or weakened a little bit further with the amendments, but it requires written justification, I guess, which seems like a good step. It requires notice to legislative leaders, which also seems good. But did the Joint Audit Committee, I guess, or has anyone discussed whether if leases exceed some term, or especially if they waive any termination, whether it makes sense to have some kind of affirmative legislative sign-off rather than just notice?
Yeah, so that's a really excellent question, Delegate Stewart. So a couple of things. So the 10, and I meant to actually have it up here with me and I didn't bring it. The 10-305 section of procurement code that I referenced has provisions in there for, I believe it's over $500,000 purchases of real property or sales of real property. That's when the LPC has the provision where they can request information, and I think it says 45-day hold to essentially review and look at it. I would say that I believe the reason we don't have the kind of systems that you're referencing in state code, because a lot of this stuff goes back a long time, is because we are the only state in the country that has the Board of Public Works. And the Board of Public Works is sort of the ultimate backstop to all of this, that, you know, any procurement over $200,000, and I'll defer to our colleagues who are much more experts on procurement than I am, but anything over $200,000, whether it's a lease or it's a purchase or a sale, has to go before the Board of Public Works to be approved. And then obviously the treasurers are, you know, the General Assembly's representative to the Board of Public Works. You obviously have the governor who, you know, ostensibly would be, you know, in a consistent position with the agency that is presenting it, and then you have the comptroller who's supposed to be that independent fiscal watchdog for the state. So I think we're cognizant of not wanting to create another layer of approval that would not only create the procurement, you know, sort of layer on top of the procurement process, but then also layer on top of the Board of Public Works. And so we're trying to strike a balance here, but you know, again, part of the reason we have the setup that we have is we bring these bills to committee. You know, this was sort of product of discussion from the Joint Audit Committee, but obviously standing committees in the General Assembly on both sides will have to take this up. So I think we'd be open, I imagine the governor's team would be as well, as looking at, you know, are there additional guardrails that we should be thinking through in that LPC function as well?
Okay, all right, awesome. I look forward to looking at the amendments. Appreciate all y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, seeing no further questions from the committee, this concludes the bill hearing on HB 1557. We'll move on to our next one from Delegate Solomon, 1419.
I swear, I'm almost done. This is actually our last joint audit bill, and this one is relatively easy, and I'm sad that our esteemed former chair of judiciary has had to step out. Because I know he had thoughts on this. It was very helpful to hear. So this was a bill, again, to sort of address, I mentioned from the outset, some of the protection pieces that we were interested in looking at. We did see a common thread across the board in a lot of audits around our state background check system and not always working as efficiently as possible in a whole host of agencies. And again, this predates anybody in particular. We see this, frankly, at every level of government, even in my own county. And I was on with our local superintendent this morning. They discovered that thousands of MCPS employees were not background checked properly, and they immediately fixed it. But we see that in school systems across the state. We see that in local agencies. We see that in state agencies. We see that for contracted entities that are working with the state. So this was an attempt to look at how we can overall reform and improve the systemic background check system across the board. What we discovered, you know, one of the audits in particular came to us sort of late in the year. As many of you know, the audit committee tends not to meet a lot during the session. We tend to meet sort of later in the fall in the interim because we wait until the cycle of audits are presented throughout the year. And then we meet usually from September through December, which means sometimes we don't get these audits until later in the year. We're working on very, very complicated bills. In time for the coming session is difficult. And so this is a bill where we thought we might be able to reach something. If you look at the fiscal note, it's pretty big. As we've worked with our partners in the Department of Public Safety, in the state police, and in other agencies, we've discovered it's even more complicated than we thought. And so I think we are probably going to scrap most of what you see in this bill. And there's sort of three larger buckets that we are working on, and again, these are somewhat moving targets as we're working collaboratively. One is to mandate the use of RATBAC, as it's mostly known, which basically is a service that's provided by the FBI free of charge to state entities and to entities that do background checks, that essentially notifies you when an individual who has been background checked commits a crime or is convicted of a crime, because obviously a background check is a snapshot in time. And so RATBAC is a updated system that then sends proactive notifications. Some state entities use RATBAC, some do not. I mentioned one of the other bills that is not coming to our committee that's going to health around the health occupations boards. We found that the health occupation boards had sort of background check requirements all over the place. And again, credit to the administration. They were already working on drafting a bill even before we had the audit hearing. And so that one, again, we mandated sort of a floor of background check processes. So we're hoping that this revised piece of legislation will include the RATBAC. We talked about OPEGA with Delegate Fisher earlier. This is a place where having OPEGA is really helpful. We want to get them to go into DPSCS, work with agencies to figure out what could a more streamlined process look like, a more efficient process, and are excited to have them work on sort of a full study over the next, usually takes them 4 to 6 months to do their work, sometimes a little bit longer and really complicated issues. So we're hoping to have that during this coming interim. We're also exploring opportunities for different types of budget language around reporting to sort of look at understanding a little bit more of the scope of the problem that was highlighted in some of the audits. So just in time to come back, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. Again, this bill will probably look very, very, very different at the end, and appreciate the insight that was shared by the former chair of the judiciary on the complications and the incredible intricacies of the background check process. Again, our goal here is to make sure that we are protecting Marylanders and that we are not allowing bad actors, whether they be contractors or whatnot, to remain in positions that they shouldn't be in.
And again, Hannah Dyer, Deputy Legislative Officer for the Governor. Again, appreciate the continued conversation and collaboration with the sponsor on this bill. As he said, implementing the bill would be a significant operational and logistical undertaking for many of our departments. While we understand that the bill is intended to address inconsistencies and gaps in how background investigations are conducted, monitored, and enforced, we're just concerned about the possible unintended negative impacts on government operations and the workforce, particularly in areas like child welfare, behavioral health, and community-based services. And I won't go into detail about those. They are detailed in some of the written testimony that you have, as well as the fiscal note. But just appreciate the interest in looking into this issue and doing the deliberative study that would be needed as a first step before moving towards something like this. So again, happy to continue that conversation with the sponsor.
Thank you very much. Delegate Stewart.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. Great to see you guys again. I understand this is a little bit of a work in progress. Looking forward to working through this in the subcommittee, and obviously I haven't seen any of the amendments that have been working through. But one thing I noticed is on section 2906B, which is on page 6, if anyone is following along at home, it explicitly states that nothing in this bill requires a background investigation for anyone already employed or providing services before October 1 of this year. And so obviously the most explosive of these audits found that there were individuals that were already working in regulated positions that had disqualifying events that had not been caught, which means that the population this bill is exempting is essentially the same population that gave rise to the bill in the first place. So I'm wondering if you guys can help me understand the policy rationale for exempting the current workforce. I understand, obviously, we don't want to create an unmanageable administrative burden, and there's a lot of people to go through. I'm just wondering if maybe there's an opportunity to do like a phased-in background check on the existing folks, because, again, it seems like from the audit, it seems like we know there are people that are currently working with disqualifying events. It seems like exempting them forever is maybe not the right move.
No, well, thank you, Delegate Stewart. And I know Mr. Weaver can jump in here as well. So this was just sort of a construct of the bill, because you'll notice it says may. What we did not want to do, again, in the construct of the bill, was suddenly require literally every person in the state who has already been background checked to now, because we're creating this bill would theoretically create a new entity, a new unit, sort of I think eventually to replace potentially what is in DPSCS right now, we wouldn't want this new unit to now then have to background check everybody else, everybody who's already been background checked. So the may in there is to say this was not a blanket mandate that every single individual who's already been background checked now has to be background checked again because we've created this new entity to do this job.
But it also doesn't prohibit them from being.
Correct.
Yeah, okay,
correct,
got it.
yes.
Okay,
No,
that makes
no,
sense.
you were exactly right. The last thing we are hoping to do is to essentially not provide those background checks in the places where they have not been done.
Right, okay,
Yeah,
makes
this
sense.
is just more of a belts and suspenders around not creating a tremendous new burden that didn't need to exist.
Sure, okay, appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Also want to acknowledge that this bill is jointly assigned with Judiciary, and we are joined by our colleague Delegate Simmons from Judiciary. Seeing if there are any further questions from folks, there are none. So that concludes our bill hearing on 1419. We are moved along from our joint audits to HB 604. Delegate Solomon.
I was gonna say, I'm the thing that stands between us and
We have one more after you.
getting home. Oh, that's right.
And voting after that.
Yeah, all right, good. So I'm not the
Yeah,
reason
good
we're
try.
not leaving yet. Good.
Wishful thinking.
Well, now for something completely different. And Madam Chair, I'd like to call up my panel. I'll transition my binders, actually, here.
Can we get you on a chair on the end? Just out of chair.
I have Donna Edwards, Denise Gilmore, Cherish Vic, Sandra Great.
Yep.
He's the attorney.
Like I said, now for something completely different. We're moving back to personnel matters and collective bargaining. So for the record, Delegate Jared Solomon here to present House Bill 604, which is a bill that would create an binding arbitration process for state employees. So, you know, I think we've talked a lot about binding arbitration already throughout session and through a number of the bills that we've heard. Essentially, what binding arbitration does, because you're going to hear from a lot of folks who are much more expert on this than I am, but I want to just cover a couple of things. Essentially, at the end of the day, binding arbitration is a process where when you can't reach an agreement through your regular negotiation, there is an actual mechanism to bring an independent third party, an arbiter that is agreed to by both sides, to help reach a conclusion. That's basically it. And what we've seen time and time and time again is because we do not have a binding arbitration process at the state level, we see agreements and negotiations drag on forever. And that often it is a tactic used by the state government to then not reach a conclusion and purposely not reach a conclusion. And so what this bill does is essentially create a fair process. In some ways, we hope it will actually save money because obviously never-ending negotiations cost significant amount of time, legal fees, not only obviously for the union, but for the government entity. And it's really important that we know that at the end of the day, we are all negotiating in good faith and that we will reach a conclusion. And so the timelines that are laid out in this bill, create that ability to reach an actual conclusion on negotiations that are fair for both sides and fit within the timeline of the budget process that we use here in the General Assembly. A couple of things that I want to point out. So this bill, as drafted and as introduced, includes the university system in Maryland. You're going to hear from them shortly. I'm not going to give out some big state secret because we did pass this bill last year, actually in a bipartisan fashion. Unfortunately, Delegate Schmidt's not here, but he was one of the delegates who voted for it from our fellow opposing party sometimes. But we voted it out 101-37 in a posture that did not include the university system in it. And that for many different reasons, but primarily is because we, as some of you may remember, passed a bill that was many years in the works to sort of overhaul the way that the university system negotiated with their unions. We created a unified system of collective bargaining that was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. Many of the folks that were up here, myself included, as the bill sponsor. And then once that bill went into effect, there were another, 2.5 year process to execute the agreement. We heard a little bit about that in some of the university system collective bargaining issues that the committee heard a couple of weeks ago. So that process is still sort of maturing, I guess, for a way of describing it. So working in concert with our partners at the Department of Budget and Management and the governor's office and our partners in state labor, we have agreed to exempt the university system from the bill because that process is still maturing. I want to just be clear that that is not necessarily a final, never-ending position. Obviously, every year is a different view. I think many of us want to create a process, again, that creates a fairness and a finite end to these agreements or to these negotiations that, again, are fair to both sides. But again, we're in no interest in sort of hiding the ball here. Creating a system of binding arbitration is a major step forward in improving our working conditions for our state employees. And so our goal is to try to get this bill into law this year and to continue to work with our partners in state government and our partners in the university system to ensure that those contracts and those agreements are executed fairly and in a timely manner and that they don't drag on forever. So I wanted to address that because a lot of what's in my written testimony talks about the university system, and you're going to hear from them shortly. So I probably just made their afternoons. So maybe we'll just get a me too and we can go home earlier. Binding arbitration, again, is nothing new. We have entities across not only state government, but local government in the state of Maryland. Some of you might remember last year, we actually added a new entity to binding arbitration for our BWI firefighters, which is a separate collectively bargained entity. The Maryland Transit Administration already has binding arbitration. And then we have 8 of the sort of biggest jurisdictions in the state already allow binding arbitration for county employees. Actually, the most recent in October, Anne Arundel County, their council passed unanimously 7-0 the provision creating binding arbitration. It will go to their ballot later this fall. So we're not doing sort of anything new even within the confines of the state. There's a pretty wide array of state governments that have binding arbitration for their state employees, and it's a pretty diverse group. I won't read them all, they're in my testimony, but I'll just highlight it. States as diverse as California, Nebraska, Texas, New Mexico, Wyoming. So again, not always bastions of liberalism. Again, this is, we think, good governance. And the last most important point, because I know obviously we are always concerned about budget and we want to make sure that we are protecting the General Assembly's ability to have budget authority. Obviously, that is a constitutional requirement that we have. There are 2 provisions in this bill that I think are really important to highlight. And you find them on pages 11 and pages 12. So page 11 is the list of sort of conditions that the arbiter, again, the independent arbiter that's selected and agreed to by both sides, has to consider as they come to a conclusion. And that says that they cannot consider, when they take into account the fiscal situation of the state, their recommendations, which could potentially be related to wage increases or benefit increases that could have a fiscal implication attached to them, the arbiter cannot order tax increases or revenue transfers from the revenue account. So that is really important because obviously you could envision a scenario where an arbiter could say, well, I'm going to give, this never happens. Obviously, in most instances you'll hear, arbiter tends to side more with management in most cases than the actual labor union themselves. But we don't want a scenario where the arbiter says, well, we're going to give you a 40% raise and we're just going to require the governor to raise taxes to do it. So the arbiter cannot make that recommendation. And the other incredibly important provision that's in here is on page 12, where it preserves and clarifies the authority of the General Assembly to have and maintain our authority over the budget. So while this does order the governor to add what is in the arbiter's decision into his or her budget, at the end of the day, the governor's budget is just a recommendation. We still retain the authority, and as most of you budget nerds know, the governor doesn't actually even sign the budget, right? It has to be passed by the House and the Senate in a uniformed fashion and then sent to the governor. So this preserves, ultimately, the governor can put whatever they want into the budget based on an arbiter's agreement or a negotiation, and the buck still stops with us. which is critically important. So the last piece in this bill is that because of the language around making sure that the governor includes the agreements as the governor, as the representative essentially of management in this instance, in this arbitration, there is a constitutional amendment that would be necessary. So this will put, if we pass this bill, and it goes to the governor for his signature, this would include a ballot measure on this November's ballot to make sure that the amendment to the Constitution is legal and goes forward. So essentially, this bill outlines a structure to create a system of binding arbitration for state government, which then has to be approved by ballot measure later this fall. And then pending that approval, this would become law and create that new system going forward. So with that, I would urge a favorable report for what will be an amended version. And I should have mentioned two other things. We've been working, again, collaboratively with the Department of Budget and Management. They have a set of minor tweaks that I know everybody has agreed to that will be included in the amended version. And then there was a couple of amendments suggested from the Pensions Board. And I don't believe they submitted them formally to the committee, but we have been working with them as well. And those will be included in the amended version that ultimately comes before the committee. So with that, I would urge a favorable report, and we'll turn it over to my panel.
Good afternoon, Denise Gilmore here on behalf of AFSCME Maryland Council 3. AFSCME represents 55,000 public sector workers across Maryland, and we are very proud to do so. Binding arbitration is not controversial policy in labor contract negotiation world. In fact, right here in Anne Arundel County, just this past October, the county council authorized binding arbitration for county employees by a vote of 7-0. It exists for most county employees at this point. For our large jurisdictions in Maryland, most state employees across the country. It is a means, just as Delegate Solomon said, who we are very glad has sponsored this and has done a very thorough job in explaining this bill. It is a means simply to reach a more efficient negotiation. Our goal is to have the product of our negotiations finalized so that by the time the governor presents the budget to all of you by January 20th, those negotiations are fully concluded. In order to have good faith negotiations, you need two things. You need a real impasse procedure. In state government, we don't have that currently. You're going to hear more about that from our panel. And you need enforceable timelines. This bill accomplishes that for our state employees. Binding arbitration helps resolve the unnecessary delays that we have because it produces a real resolution and closure. The non-binding fact-finding procedure that we have simply just is just a delay because it provides a recommendation on top of conflict. This is actually a binding decision that helps us provide closure to any conflict that we have. And as the delegate mentioned, it saves money because we can actually provide closure. So we urge a favorable report. If I may just say one more thing, you are going to hear testimony from one of our university members today. We are going to keep coming back every single year to get binding arbitration for our university employees. It's important. They particularly don't have timelines because of the constitutional amendment requirement for our state employees in the executive branch. It's incredibly important that we do this year for them. But I really hope you listen to my sister's testimony from Morgan State today. I think you'll hear why it's so important there too. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Sandra Gray. I'm a member of AFSCME Local 1885, and I work at Morgan State University. I've been on the Morgan State University bargaining team for the last 7 years. In higher education, we have no timelines to govern our negotiations, so they tend to drag on for years sometimes. I was on the bargaining team from 2020 to 2023 when it took us 3 years to negotiate our contract. This wasn't our first contract. We've been covered by collective bargaining for over 20 years. While we were in negotiations for those 3 years, the issues we were bringing up simply weren't getting resolved. Our health and safety issues like COVID protocols were going unaddressed. One of my colleagues, Casper McAllister, on the bargaining team, caught COVID at work and died while we were fighting for masks and gloves at the table. Our members' compensation requests went unaddressed while upper-level management was receiving promotions. Time and time again, the issues we were bringing up at the table felt like they were just being ignored. It was a totally unproductive dynamic. I felt frustrated and disrespected. All of this could have been avoided if we had enforceable timelines to our negotiations and binding arbitration. Negotiations should be about compromise and coming together in a good faith effort to try and reach agreement, not stalling indefinitely to avoid resolution. Please pass House Bill 604 so we can have a more meaningful, efficient, and productive negotiations in higher education. I thank you for your time and attention in this matter.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Wells, Vice Chair Kerr, and members of the committee. My name is Cherish Vick, and I'm the Secretary Treasurer of AFSCME Maryland Council 3, as well as AFSCME Local 112. I'm a state employee. I've worked for Maryland Department of Human Services for over 16 years. I'm testifying in support of House Bill 604 because I'm just trying to achieve the same rights as my peers. And here are the facts. I am a Maryland state employee. My impasse procedure is an unproductive, non-binding fact-finding process. If I was a state employee in the Maryland Transit Administration, like my union brother, Mike McMillan, who is the president of ATU 1300, I would have binding arbitration as an impasse procedure. I work in Prince George's County, but if I worked as a county employee, like my Council 3 Executive Board sister Rhonda Porter, who works for the Prince George's County Health Department, I not only would have access to binding arbitration during impasse at contract negotiations, but I would also have the option to strike. We're not even asking for that here, but our locals do share a building as state and county health and human service employees, so binding arbitration would be nice. And across the line from where I work in Washington, D.C., and up north in Pennsylvania, and in 25 other states, state employees already have binding arbitration. So do many county employees in Maryland, all of our public school employees, and our organized county library workers. State employees deserve to have the same collective bargaining rights as all of these other public service workers. Please support House Bill 604. Maryland state employees are only asking for a fair, reasonable, and binding method to quickly resolve impasse if we reach one at the negotiations table. Thank you.
I think they can hear me. Good afternoon, once again, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. I'm Donna Edwards. I'm president of the Maryland State and DC AFL-CIO. Binding arbitration is mutually beneficial to our state, our taxpayers, and the employees. This is not new, as you've heard. We have it in several of our governmental entities in Maryland, but I'd like to let you know that at my Monday night labor lobbyist meeting, where we have several of our unions represented, I asked how many people have binding arbitration, and everybody's hands went up with the exception of our public employees. So I think that that's something that we need to address here. I was president of AFSCME when we got collective bargaining. And we got collective bargaining in 1996 by executive order. We had to come back in 1998. We got it for only the state employees in law. We had to wait again until 2001 to bring in the university. And I would like to just echo what my sister Denise has said and what the sponsor has said. We will be back, but we recognize what we want to go forward with this year, and this is an important step for Maryland to move on. At its core, collective bargaining is about giving people who do the work the meaningful opportunity to be treated right on the job. Without the tools, they can never have the meaningful collective bargaining experience. This is the tool that needs to be in the toolbox for ending and having efficient bargaining with the state and our public employees to come to a mutual beneficial and effective end that is responsible to all parties. So please put this tool in the toolbox and give our public employees binding arbitration by passing House Bill 604.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Excuse me. My name is David Marr. I'm an attorney for AFSCME Council 3 as well as other unions. I'm primarily here to answer any technical questions the committee has. But I do want to make one point as someone who's actually gone to binding interest arbitration, which is that I've gone to it a number of times for unions and locals that do have it, but I've never actually completed it, which is to say, we've gotten to a point where the parties are at impasse and they start the process, but just the threat of having the arbitrator come in and make the decision for you motivates both sides and incentivizes both sides to come together and find an agreement they can both live with. So when I say I've started it, we've gotten to the point where we have an arbitrator selected, but we've never actually gotten to the point where the arbitrator made a decision, because just having that tool in the toolbox really, I think, makes cooler heads prevail and makes everyone understand, okay, I'd rather have some control here and figure out what we can live with rather than turning it over to someone else. And that, you know, again, it has to be there, though, for it to have that effect. So for those reasons, I echo everyone else's support.
Great. Thank you so much to the bill sponsor and to your panel.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to correct the record on something. I have a little bit of egg on my face, as a colleague reminded me. I was thinking pre-2023, and the constitutional amendment that passed, the governor does now actually sign the budget. Didn't for many, many years, so.
Okay, I'm glad you
can't be a
corrected the
former
record.
appropriator with embarrassing myself on that one.
All right. Yep, okay, Delegate Sample Hughes.
Thank you, Delegate, for the bill, and to all those who are here attending today and testifying, because I know over the years I've certainly heard from workers and other concerns have been raised from the mask to many other things. So thank you for doing that today to share with us. I just had a clarity question on the fiscal note. So is it my understanding that at least the $500,000, this is an annual cost? And does it also include, or we have to add to, the university system being in a part of that number? And then the last part is the cost for it to go on the ballot. Has that been adjusted as well?
So I think the majority of that 500,000 was the USM, which was an interesting take in that their analysis of the cost was so much higher than DBM's. I guess that now that the USM is out of it, we should have a much smaller fiscal note.
Okay, so the fiscal note may be adjusted.
It should be.
And if I can just make a point, it seems like this is primarily based on the cost of bargaining, which USM and the state already have to engage in. So if the only additional thing here would be an actual arbitration hearing, which would not come close to that amount.
It was a little perplexing. It was perplexing on why DBM's or the USM's analysis was for some reason 9 times higher than DBM's. Right?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I know you try to cut yourself off.
No,
But I just wanted to do it because I was a little confused, and I'm probably not the only one. So, but thank you for the response. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I was saying the budget and tax hearing, there were questions on that.
Oh, okay, thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Seeing no further questions from the committee, we'll move on next to the favorable with amendments. I have Dana Phillips or Secretary White. Oh, there you are. Good afternoon, Secretary.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Jake Weissman, Secretary of Planning, Budget and Management. The sponsor already mentioned the amendment that we have, which is in your written packet. So I'll just say with that amendment, the department is here favorable with amendments, and happy to take any questions you have.
Thank you very much. Seeing if there's any questions from the committee for you. All right, there are none. Thank you so much. Hope you feel better. We'll move on to our unfavorable, Ms. Sherry Rojas from the University of Maryland.
Good afternoon, Chair Wells, Vice Chair Kerr, members of the committee. My name is Sherry Rojas. I'm the Senior Director of Labor for the USMO. We appreciate Delegate Solomon's comments on his intent to exclude the USM from the bill, and we want to thank him for that. We would stand in support of the final bill in that form. Happy to take any questions from you. Thank you.
Do you have a question, Delegate Terraza?
Why should USM not be in the bill?
So I could go through the original testimony that I intended to present today. I'm happy to do that. Last year, the version of this bill that passed out of the House was revised to exclude the USM for a number of reasons. This will be the third major statutory change to collective bargaining in recent years and seemingly attempts to fix a problem that does not exist for the system, whose institutions have been able to successfully reach agreement for the past 25 plus years under the existing statutory process. The USM has seen cuts to the budget over the past 2 fiscal years of 10%, and our institutions have seen significant reductions in federal dollars, including grant funds. The imposition of additional policy changes would be challenging for our institutions and would be compounded with the passages of other pending labor bills.
Okay, just I don't have all that right in front of me right this second. So you say it's successful. You've been successful in the contract negotiations.
Correct.
Then why you wouldn't have to go to arbitration if you're successful in those? So why wouldn't you be, like, how would that impact you if you're coming to an agreement? Sure. Why would it impact you at all? It seems like a good idea to have it.
Well, I think there are a number of places in the bill that would create some challenges for our institutions. First of all, the time frame within which to negotiate is limited strictly to between July 1 and September 30th. The negotiation of a new agreement often takes 18 months or more to negotiate a very first agreement. We have a number of pending bills right now that could establish new units for our institution. It would require the appointment of an arbitrator at the very beginning of the process who would do more than just preside over a final hearing. That arbitrator under this bill would serve as a mediator. They would resolve disputes during the negotiation process itself. They would function as a settlement officer, trying to get the parties to reach agreement before binding arbitration, and then serve as a final decision maker in binding arbitration, which we see as a potential conflict of interest. It's the way that this bill is written. We're not saying that we're opposed to having a process to resolve disputes. Certainly strengthening and tightening up the existing process is something that we'd be happy to discuss.
Yep, thank you so much. We can talk more offline. That would be great. But thank you. I think you've answered the question. Are there any more questions from the committee for the witness? Okay, seeing none, that concludes our bill hearing on HB 604. We'll move next to our last bill, HB 1360, Delegate Lehman. So for Delegate Lehman, I have James Browning, Sonia Demare, and Greg Smith.
I was sitting so high up in my chair back there.
Let's just give it a moment for the door to close.
Yeah.
Just so there's no background.
I said I was sitting so high up in our new chairs, and now I feel like I'm way down low. So good afternoon, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and esteemed committee members. For the record, I'm Mary Lehman, happy to be the caboose here on Jared Solomon Day in GLE. I am here to ask for your favorable consideration of House Bill 1360. I thank the committee for the opportunity to present this bill. House Bill 1360 addresses a fundamental gap in Maryland's system of government transparency, the absence of any public disclosure of what lobbyists are doing during the 90 days when the General Assembly is in session. Under current law, lobbyists must file activity reports twice a year, in May after the session has ended and in November. The reports covering the January through April legislative session are not due until the last day of May. By that point, the General Assembly has adjourned, key votes have been cast, and bills have either been enacted or they have died. The public, the media, and members of the General Assembly have no ability during session to see in real time who is lobbying on what legislation or what position they have taken on behalf of clients. House Bill 1360 corrects that by creating two in-session reporting deadlines, February 15th and March 15th, and requires each lobbyist to show which bills they worked on, the position their clients took on each bill, and the identity of the client on whose behalf they are acting. This is a targeted, proportionate, and important reform. Maryland's lobbying disclosure framework, created in the mid-1970s, requires lobbyists to register annually with a $100 fee per client and to file semi-annual activity reports. The 2001 and 2002 legislative sessions produced substantial amendments to the lobbying law that did improve the quality of disclosure but did not alter the 2 reports per year, both filed after session. House Bill 1360 adds in-session reporting deadlines to the existing semi-annual framework. The central insight is that the timing of the disclosure matters as much as its content. A lobbyist's bill-by-bill activity disclosed in May is history. Disclosed in February and March, it would be news. Maryland is increasingly out of step with national standards for lobbying transparency. The nonprofit research organization, F-, and we have a representative here today, completed a comprehensive 50-state analysis of lobbyist disclosure laws. It awarded Maryland a C+ grade in its 2024 report. That ranking sounds respectable, but the grade reflects a concerning reality that Maryland earns high marks for some categories, such as requiring disclosure of compensation by client and maintaining a reasonably functional online database, but it falls significantly short on what F- identifies as the 3 keys to a strong disclosure system. And those are disclosure of lobbyist salaries, disclosure of bills lobbied on, and disclosure of positions taken on those bills. Maryland has 2 of those 3 things. It requires compensation disclosure and bill disclosure, but it lacks mandatory position disclosure. HB 1360 closes that gap by requiring position disclosure in those 2 new in-session reports. The bill increases transparency and positions the state to achieve the highest tier of disclosure. HB 1360 takes the most practical step currently available by ensuring that during the heart of the legislative session, the public receives 2 snapshots of who is lobbying on what and in which direction. For the first time, the public will have access to this information about who is lobbying on which bills during the weeks when committee votes are being taken. F- audits that have been done around the country have documented instances of lobbying firms simultaneously representing entities with both opposing positions, so both for and against on the same legislation. Without bill level and position level disclosure during session, these conflicts are invisible. With the disclosure HB 1360 requires, the same lobbying firm could be seen supporting a bill on behalf of one client and opposing it on behalf of another if in fact that is occurring. This does not prohibit that practice, I want to make that clear, but it would make it transparent. The Maryland Ethics Commission Staff Council conducts annual lobbyist activity report audits following the legislative session. The increase in bill number disclosure from 47% in 2024 to 55% in 2025 is attributable in part to that audit work. So once House Bill 1360 makes bill number and position disclosure mandatory in those 2 in-session reports, the Ethics Commission system can be enhanced to actually permit bill number searching of activity reports that would allow any citizen or a legislator, any one of us, to search for all lobbyists that are working on a specific bill. The regulated lobbying community may argue that House Bill 1360 imposes an undue administrative burden. I offer the following two responses. First of all, professional lobbyists in Maryland, the individual firms regulated in this bill are compensated, the individuals and the firms regulated by the bill, are compensated at rates that make Maryland's disclosure requirements look modest by any comparative measure. For these practitioners, the cost of keeping a contemporaneous record of which bills they are actually working on and what position their clients have taken is, I believe, trivial relative to the size of their compensation. Second, the states that impose much more rigorous disclosure requirements, including Colorado, Wisconsin, Delaware, and others, have not experienced a collapse of their lobbying industry. Keeping a record of bill numbers and positions should not be a burden that require more staff, specialized technology, or a considerable amount of time. So I do have an amendment that I'm offering, a sponsor amendment that would limit in that February 15th and that March 15th report 3 specified disclosures: employer identity, bill number, and position. The full financial disclosures would continue to apply to those May 31st and November 30th semi-annual reports. House Bill 1360 is targeted reform. It does not require daily reporting. It does not impose a 72-hour disclosure trigger. It does not fundamentally restructure the existing reporting framework. It asks simply that twice during that 90-day session, every registered lobbyist tell the public which bills they are working on, who they are working for, and where they stand. 19 other states, 19 require monthly disclosure during their sessions. Delaware actually delivers weekly lobbying summaries to every legislator's desk during the session. And Colorado posts updated positions within 72 hours. Maryland asked for 2 reports this bill would say that Maryland would ask for those 2 reports during that 90-day session. I believe that that would not be a burden, but a new important baseline, and I urge your favorable report on House Bill 1360. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Kerr, members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm James Browning. I'm the director of F-, and I used to be the director of Common Cause Maryland from 2001 to 2005. Some of the states that Delegate Lehman mentioned with stronger real-time disclosure requirements. I have to share from the experience of having done a 50-state report card on these states and having traveled to many of these states as a regional director for Common Cause. People love it. The public loves seeing what's going on in real time. Legislators love it. They can understand the full array of an agenda that a lobbyist might have when they come before them. And lobbyist clients love it because they can see if a lobbyist is doing something that might be at cross purposes with the reason that they hired that lobbyist. When we launched 3 years ago, we created the first ever database of every state level fossil fuel lobbyist in the country. We tagged all of their other clients by sector, and you can often see instances of these lobbyists doing one thing for a fossil fuel client that is harmful to one of their other clients, like a local government client. So from that vantage, there's an enormous transparency benefit here. You'll see in our testimony, and Delegate Lehman mentioned this, Maryland is the only state where bill numbers are required, but there's no in-session real-time information available. And we did one other audit of the 18 states where bill numbers have to be disclosed. We looked at what lobbyists are putting in there. Now, the reporting requirements on the Maryland Ethics Commission's website, the directive to lobbyists is that the description of the matter lobbied shall include bill numbers where possible, but that's not what happened. That's not what's been happening for 20 years. People have been putting in answers that are not the bill numbers. So this is a great solution to a long-standing problem.
Okay. Hi, good afternoon.
Madam Chair, Sir Vice Chair, thank you for this opportunity. My name is Sonia Demery. I'm the Director of the Climate Communications Coalition. We're a nonprofit Maryland-based grassroots climate and environmental justice organization, and we strongly support HB 1360. Much of Maryland's climate inaction, as well as current reversals of climate action, are the result of constant lobbying by fossil fuel interests, only some of which are being properly disclosed. This harms Marylanders, our environment, and our natural resources, some of which may not recover. Weak lobbying disclosure undermines climate progress and disenfranchises the public. Recent results of lobbying are missing our emissions reductions targets, vetoing common sense bipartisan bills, giving data centers free passes on CPCNs while allowing hundreds of backup generators to spew Class 1 carcinogens into neighboring communities and the environment. And I urge you to read some additional ones in my written statement. I have more detail and to add some more examples. Unfortunately, since Maryland's lobbyists including those for fossil fuel and big data, only comply with disclosure requirements 50% of the time, how can we address this? The lack of disclosure is part of a pattern of deception by the fossil fuel industry that has haunted this country for decades. HB 1360 brings much needed transparency a little closer and to a level comparable to most other states by adding 2 additional in-session filings of full reports, including position. This is easily done and would help elected officials and the public understand the motivation of all lobbyists. In addition, the Maryland Ethics Commission should make lobbyists' reports available in real time during a bill hearing. HB 1360 will help this legislator better comply with the public ethics law. This law exists, first, to assure the people of the impartiality and independent judgment of officials and employees, and second, to avoid improper influence or even the appearance of improper influence. So let's live up to the climate environmental justice leadership claims that we so often hear in Maryland and restore the full confidence and trust in this legislative system. Please pass this bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the bill sponsor and to your panel. Oh, we do have one favorable virtual. We'll take him before we open for questions. Mr. Greg Smith.
Good afternoon. Could somebody start my video? Or is, I don't
Yes,
mind
give
if
us
it's
one
off,
moment.
but if you want to have it on, you can.
Yes, give us a moment, Mr. Smith.
There we go.
Okay, we
I
can see you.
apologize for the image quality if it's bad over there. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and committee members. First, thank Delegate Lehman, Ruth, Terasa, Vaughn, and Wu for sponsoring this important common sense legislation. I won't reiterate the points made by Delegate Lehman and Mr. Browning and Mr. Murray. They've summarized the bill quite well. I will point out on the fiscal note of $300,000 is a small fraction of what some of the highest paid lobbyists in Annapolis are paid annually. I think this bill is long overdue. I could tell you as somebody who has lobbied in Annapolis on some pretty tough environmental bills and transparency bills, and who does an awful lot of work in Prince George's County in Maryland, working with other activists on data centers and other issues. I definitely would like to know whether lobbyists, folks lobbying the General Assembly, are on the one hand representing Prince George's County or other counties on certain issues, and at the same time representing corporate special interests whose goals are inimical to the policies and interests of Prince George's County or other counties in Maryland. Thank you for your time. I urge a favorable report for the bill as written.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. Seeing if we have any questions from the committee. So, all right, seeing as we have, Delegate Crutchfield.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the bill. I just wanted to talk a little bit about transparency, because that sounds like that's one of the main issues here. Is that correct? And just understanding, I'm assuming that the public can in some way inquire as to what a lobbyist is actually doing through the data from the Maryland Ethics Commission. Is that correct?
Go ahead.
That's correct. And what's so interesting about that process is that if you are willing to spend hours and hours, you can discover some of these really troubling disclosure failures for yourself. A key distinction with Maryland that we found in our 50-state report card is that in many states, you can go on their Ethics Commission website and push a single button, and it will give you a file with all activity by all lobbyists. And it's amazing what you can find in there. If you go to Pennsylvania, don't push that button because it gives you a file with 3 million lines of data that will crash your computer. Maryland doesn't have that. And in fact, the Ethics Commission's own staff has to scroll through hundreds and thousands of pages to do their own audits. So we see this bill as a way to also empower them to do the great work that they're already doing in a more efficient way.
So would you say also that there's probably somewhat of an enforcement issue as well?
There's absolutely an enforcement issue, and I can tell you, part of this is on me. Like when I became the Common Cause Maryland director in 2001, I looked at those disclosures and thought, aren't people supposed to be putting bill numbers? And they weren't. They would say, I lobbied on legislation or all matters of interest to my client. And at the time, I thought, this seems like a really big problem. How could we possibly solve this? Now that so many more things are online, especially the records of what happens in committees, it is possible to do these audits and point the way towards enforcement. And we applaud the work that the Ethics Commission is doing internally on enforcement. They really need a stronger law and more resources for us to get all the way there.
Okay, it sounds like that's what you're hitting. The fact that there are resources, and maybe Delegate Lehman, maybe that's where your bill really needs to go, towards that more than anything right now. Thank you.
Thank you. We're trying for that, and thank you for the questions, Delegate Crutchfield. They're good ones. Thank you.
Delegate Tiliberti.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I know Delegate Lehman, and she is a superb member of the House of Delegates. She truly is. Having said that,
here it comes.
Here comes the bomb. The more you or anybody else regulates lobbyists, the less esteem we have for us in this room. I know most of you in here, some better than others, but nobody in here is going to be swayed by a prime rib and a bottle of Moet Chandon. We're just simply not going to do it.
That's not this bill, Delegate. The dinner bill.
No, I'm not done yet. No, I am. That's my point. End. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Seeing no further questions from the committee, this concludes our bill hearing on HB 1360. Thank you, Delegate Lehman and your sponsor panel. Okay, so we will adjourn for our bill hearings for 5 minutes, and then we'll reconvene for our vote session.